Hello. In this tutorial we're going to have a look at how we can use activation volumes and modifiers to achieve an effect like this. Okay, so what we have here is we have a street that is being affected by roots growing under it, or like an earthquake, or I don't know, maybe a tremor going under it or something like that. And we have a lot of things going on here. Obviously this is just simple geometry for tutorial purposes, but we have activation volumes or one activation volumes that actually goes through the mesh and activates the fragments so they kind of fall down. We have modifiers to velocity modifiers to move the fragments up a little bit when they become active. We have rotation modifiers, and then we have some filters on the modifiers. So I'm going to show you how you set this up. Just like everything in fractures, it's actually very straightforward, and it gives you ultimate control over your entire sim, whether it's fracturing or actually simulating the destruction, because as we all know, controlling your sim results, or control over your sim results in finaling your shots. So let's have a look how I set this up. And what I have here is I have just like the ground, and I have a simple cube for the street. I'm using this ground so when I when I fracture this street, so the fragments will kind of like fall down, and they will create an indentation inside or in the street. So let's go through it from the beginning. I'll go quite quickly because setting up a simple fracture sim should be pretty straightforward now. So let's just take this one, the street, break it. Let's create a simulator. Let's take the street and do a simulator and connect it to the simulator. Then I'm gonna bring up the, a bit smaller. I'm gonna bring up the fracture UI, and I'm gonna change this a little bit. So I'm gonna randomize color. I'm gonna make, say, about 300 fragments, or num point of 300. Let's go again there. Okay. So that's that. So also what I have to do is I have to add the ground to it, and both of these I'm gonna set to passive. Okay, because I'm gonna activate them with the activation volume. So select both, turn that off. Okay. So then in the globals, I'm gonna use bullet as my solver. And I'm going to increase my gravity like that. I'm going to set my point separation, which is kind of like the precision of the sim, to something a little bit higher, which will result in a faster sim. But you will see, I mean, it will just work. There will be no intersection or something like that. But if you would have intersections or shimmering fragments, you could always increase or decrease actually this value, so you have more points. So yeah, let's just save this. So let's call it activation tutorial, something like that. And let's set up the events. The first event that I'm gonna set up is, because although this is actually, it looks like it's fractured, it isn't really. We still have an unbroken mesh. So the first thing that I'm gonna do is I'm gonna delete the default event, and I'm gonna create a bomb. I'm not gonna create a bomb to actually use the event of the bomb, meaning pushing fragments out with a push modifier, but I'm just gonna adjust it a little bit, so the only thing that the event will do is actually break the geometry. So I'm gonna go animated bomb. Okay, I'm gonna delete this first filter and I'm also going to delete the push modifier. Okay, so what I have here is I have nothing more than an event that will actually break my geometry. It's not going to simulate it yet, it's just going to break the mesh. So let's call this initial break. So there we go. So that's that. You mean if I play this, we're not really going to see anything, because no event is actually doing anything to the fragments. So what I'm going to do, the next one, is I'm going to create an activation volume, activate within volume. Okay, this is going to create a volume here at the center, and this is what I'm going to animate from left to right, or whatever you want. So let's do that over, say, 40 frames or something like that. I'm going to take this one and pop it here in the beginning, like that. Maybe change it to a sphere, make it a little bit smaller, so it's just like here in the beginning. You could animate this whatever you want, if you wanted to zigzag or whatever, but just to show you, I'm just going to make it go through the middle, and I'm going to set this one here to points. What that means is that whenever any point of a fragment comes within this volume, that fragment will get activated. If I would leave this to center, then the actual center of mass of a fragment would have to come within the volume for that fragment to be activated. So in this case, I kind of like this kind of effect where you know, what I'm trying to do with here is to create some more randomization, because it's going to look a little bit more irregular. I have a feeling with most of my sims that if I change this to point, your sim looks more realistic because it looks more irregular. So let's key that, just normal Maya keys. Go to 30 or something like that. Set that on the other side. Set another key. Just save that. And let's create a take of our initial sim. So first, go. And there we go. So what we're going to see is, if I play this, sorry, if I bake this, is you see that, you know, these pieces, these fragments get activated, but, you know, it's not very exciting, of course, so we're going to have to add some modifiers to it. But you can see, however, that they do get activated. They kind of fall down and slide around a little bit. So maybe because they slide a little bit too much, what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the friction on both. By the way, you can see that this is something that we implemented in I can't remember, in 1.4 somewhere. You can multi-select your objects, and then whatever attribute you change here on the right will actually you know, affect both of the objects that you have selected. So I'm going to set the friction to about 5, and let's do another take. Okay. I also want to, you know, illustrate how fast this is. You know, it's almost real time. I'm doing a take with 200 num points, so it is pretty fast. Now, one thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to move this ground a little bit lower. It's a good opportunity to show you how to do that. I'm going to go to my live simulation, go back to my first frame, take this piece of geometry, go into my move tool, move it down just a little bit, and then go to fracture, set initial state. Okay. And now if I rewind again, you will see that there's now more space in between the ground and the street. So just like, you know, any other rigid body dynamics engine, you just set your initial state after you change the initial positioning of your objects. So let's bake that out again. They're gonna fall a little bit deeper now, obviously, something like that. Yeah, that looks pretty good. So what we want now is, let's say that this is an earthquake, and, you know, like you've seen in so many movies, something rips through the street. So what we want is, we want these fragments to kind of jump up a little bit when they become active. Now, what you how you would do that is using modifiers. So if I go to my events, you will see that here at the bottom you have modifiers. Okay, here in the tab says modifiers. Now, what modifiers are, it is basically a per fragment piece of data that you can add. So it's kind of, if you know anything about Maya particles, it's kind of like a per particle runtime expression, but it's not really an expression. It's more like a UI thing. So you don't really have to write any code, but you can just add, you can what we call a modifier stack, and each fragment will be affected by the modifier. So I'll show you that in a bit, but I just want to show you again here how this UI is organized. So in the event tab, we go from left to right and from top to bottom. So what that means is, you create your events first, then you create your filters, and when your filters evaluate to true, so if all these filters, like the one that I have here, evaluate to true, then your mesh will break. Okay. If you want to affect each fragment individually, or you want to assign random values of something like velocity or rotation, what we're going to do in a second, to each fragment, then you use modifiers. Modifiers are basically per fragment modifier, something that you can assign to each fragment after it has been broken. So after a mesh has been broken. So again, to repeat that, a mesh gets broken into fragments, and if you want to manipulate your fragments after the mesh has been broken, you use modifiers. And what you have here at the bottom is what we call the modifier stack, because you can stack your modifiers. And I will also show you how you can filter filter out certain fragments, so you can have modifiers only act on certain fragments. You can filter them out with filters, which you can see here, which is extremely powerful. So let's do the first one. Let's say that we want these, when they become active, because you can see that the active, the fragment becoming active is a modifier as well. It's an assigned modifier. But let's say that when they become active, we want these fragments to fly up a little bit. So, and each should have kind of like a different value for that velocity in y. So let's say that we use a randomize modifier. Okay, so we add a randomized modifier. One thing to note is that these have to be in order, because your fragments are going to get activated first, and then you're going to add your velocity, and then later we're going to add our rotation. Those last two could be interchangeable, but I wouldn't be able to put my randomize first and then my activation, because for the randomize to work, the fragments have to be active first. So again, from left to right, from top to bottom. So what we're going to use, dynamic state, a velocity, okay, and it's going to be in y. So let's say between 10 and 40. So what this is going to do is each fragment is going to get a value for velocity y between 10 and 40. So let's have a look. Let's create another take. Let's call it vel mod. Let's bake that. Yes. So you'll see now that they fly up. Okay. And that looks kind of cool already, actually. Now let's show you a little bit. They look a little bit big and uniform. We will create clusters later, but they look a little bit big. So what you can do is, this is the whole proceduralism of fracture, is let's say that we go back to our break node and we just want some more fragments. Let's say 400. Okay, let's generate that. You see that that happened on the fly. And let's do that take again, where we had the velocity modifier. And there we go. Looks a little bit better. They fly up and then they fall down on the ground. Okay. Now let's add a little bit more oomph to that, and let's have them rotate as well, kind of like a rotate PP on particles. So let's create another modifier. Let's create another randomized modifier, and let's go to dynamic state, rotate, and let's just give them, a value between 0 and 360 on all axes. Let me just copy paste. Go 0, 0. Okay. So let's make another take for that. Let's call it rot mod, and let's bake that. And you will see now that aside from being pushed up, they also rotate. Okay, they rotate, kind of like they spin. That's the word I'm looking for. Okay, so that's that. Okay, so that looks kind of like this right now. You get that activation volume going through that. So they look all a little bit uniform. So the next step that we're going to do is we're going to add some clusters. Okay, always add clusters. It adds realism to your sim. So let's go back, go to the live sim, rewind that, and in the break geonode under localize, I'm going to go clusters. Okay, and I'm going to use a Voronoi box, and whatever whatever fragments are inside those Voronoi cells will be clustered. If you want to know more about that, have a look at our tutorial series about clustering. It's explained in depth there. So I'm going to go to Voronoi cells, enable it, create a breaker, and you can see now that my fragments are clustered. Obviously the clusters are way too big, and as explained in that tutorial that I just mentioned, clusters use a break geonode. Voronoi clusters use a break geonode, so you can just adjust them the way that you want, or that you normally would do in a break geonode. So I'm just going to create 30 num points to get some more interesting clusters. Maybe change that to a different seed. Yeah, that looks interesting. But now everything is clustered. We don't want that. Okay, let's say that we only want 50% of these fragments clustered. So I'm going to go back to my break geo node, localize, and in here the percentage I'm going to change to 50%, 0.5. Okay, and you can see that now only 50% of them are clustered. So I don't really like that these two clusters here in the front are kind of together. So I'm just gonna go back up to my cluster break geo node and maybe change the seed a little bit and generate that. And these ones are still a little bit too big, so I'm gonna create some more num points. Okay, change that seed a little bit. Yeah, that looks good. Okay. Yeah. So what we're going to have now is we're going to have, just imagine this is a street, it's going to have like these slabs of concrete that kind of stick together, then they're going to fall down, and eventually if you want you can have them crumble or break, you know, the clusters could break apart after that as well. I also explained in the other tutorials. To make sure everything is okay here, 16 minutes, okay. So yeah, so let's make a take of that. Clusters, that's good. So let's bake that to disk, and you will see that they will act the clusters will act just as the fragments. And in this case, that is kind of problematic. And this is a good opportunity to show you what filters on modifiers can do, because you can see what is happening is the rotation modifier works very nice on the smaller fragments, but because the clusters are so big they kind of pop. So what we're going to do is I'm going to create a filter on the rotation modifier that says, okay, rotate all the fragments but not the clusters. So how do you do that? Very easy. You see here's my rotate modifier. I'm going to create a filter, a cluster filter, and I'm going to say only rotate the fragments when they are not clusters. So I'm going to say is not. So what that means is the clusters are going to get this initial velocity in y, but they're not going to get the rotation values. So let's bake that again, see if that worked. And there we go. You see, you get these slabs of concrete that kind of move as they would in a real situation, and that looks pretty cool. So that is kind of it. One thing that I still want to show you is the versatility of this. Is let's say that they change their mind, or you change your mind, and instead of this linear activation volume going through the street, they want one that radiates out from the center. So you can you can keep all these values that you have, and you can just change the animation on your activation volume. So I'm just going to take this one here. I'm going to delete the keys on it. So break connections. There we go. And I'm just going to place it here in the center. Place it in the center here. Let's say that we want it in the beginning. We're just going to keep that street, and then it will be some kind of force that radiates out. So I'm just going to keep it up outside of the fragment, so nothing is going to get activated for let's say 7 frames or something, and then by frame 10 it's going to go down. So those fragments are going to get activated right there in the center, like that. And then let's say by frame 25, I'm just going to scale this out. Oops. I'm just going to scale this out, and everything will get activated. So like that. Let's see if that's doing it. Oh, I forgot to set a key here. So let's just make that small again, like that. Okay, and set a key there. So let's see if that's working. Let's go down. This is, by the way, simming because I still have my take active. And then it's going to go out. Okay, so let's create a take of that. Let's call that radiating. And let's sim that. So see what happens. It's going to go down. And there we go. And just like that, it's super procedural, super easy, very easy to get fast iterations out, very easy, very powerful to address nodes, because We just want to help you final your shots so you can go home and enjoy time, in whatever way that you choose. So again, Fracture gives you sorry. Fracture gives you ultimate control over your sim so you can final your shots. I hope this helped, and see you next time.